Let's talk about wages and inflation. So we've got some new numbers out. We've been tracking, obviously, what's been happening on the inflation front now for the past number of weeks, as it is a reality. If you've noticed, of course, the cost of goods have gone up and exploded across the United States. And obviously, when we see inflation, rich people are fine because it actually makes them more profitable when you pay more for things. So Wall Street is happy when we have inflation. But average Americans, poor and middle class Americans, get hit the hardest as all of the cost of healthcare and food and gas all go up and rent goes up, and yet wages are not going up.
Well, a new Conference Board survey shows that companies are planning to increase wages by an average of 3.9% in 2022. Now, that sounds nice, but when you put it next to other numbers in the economy, it's not so great. Now, consider people on fixed income through Social Security are getting a 5.9% raise when the calendar hits January, right? So they get a cost of living increase of almost twice what working people are getting. And inflation is currently sitting above 6%. So if inflation is above 6% and your raise is only 3.9%, you're not getting a raise at all. You're still losing over 2%, right?
Right.
Same thing for people on fixed income. If they're only getting a 5.9% raise in their Social Security payments, but inflation is over 6%, they're getting a raise of zero. That's a net zero, right? So it doesn't seem great. Now, the Labor Department released statistics saying that fewer people than ever are quitting their jobs, though still an astronomical number of people are quitting per month, to the tune of 4 million. 4 million people a month are like out, right? Without any plan to go to the next job. And so it seems like that's pretty good, but employers are not applauding any of this. In fact, they say that job openings increased to 11 million positions available, but still few people were hired. So people don't want to do these jobs. They don't want to take these jobs, and they don't want to stay in the jobs that they have right now. And so who's getting this 3.9% raise is the few people who are staying put, I suppose.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to think about, like, well, how can we get people to work? What could we do? How could the government incentivize this? And Japan has a really interesting program on trying to tackle this wage disparity. And they just rolled out this plan for massive tax breaks for companies that actually lift wages. Well, think about that for a second. Then there's a tax incentive for these companies to raise wages, and it benefits them. So now
Build Back Better has that for the media. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So the media companies
would get this exact tax break. The Build Back Better law has a tax break for media companies to write off salaries. So that absolutely is an incentive to raise salaries. For the media. Not for small business, not for anybody else, really.
Unbelievable to think that, that's who needs the help right now is, CNN needs the help. MSNBC really needs the help right now.
They do.
They need the help. They're in trouble. They're, absolutely in trouble. And so we see the continued rise of prices, 6% on inflation right now. We were talking 2% just a few months ago. And this genie is not going to be put back in the bottle, at least for another year or so. Fed Chief Jerome Powell said that we're looking at inflation rates staying around this hot, probably through 2022, maybe even into 2023. So as your rent goes up, healthcare costs go up, price of food goes up, gas prices, everything else goes up, and rent, your wages are not going to keep up with this. Simply. It's just not going to happen.
Yes.
6% inflation is devastating to average Americans. And a new report says that rising prices need to be curbed fast. But what can the President of the United States do in this regard?
You're right. Yes. Incentivize hiring and also provide federal law that protects certain liberties that come along with the job, such as parental leave and more incentives. Yeah, that's what the tax plan is a series of incentives. So there's a lot that they could do, but they don't want to if it doesn't, because, their buddies at the top are not unemployed. They're not suffering.
The thing is, though, the Federal Reserve has been, happy to just continue to funnel billions of dollars to Wall Street to make sure that Wall Street gets tons of money, right? And then on top of that, these interest rates are kept artificially low. So these interest rates should not be as low as they are right now, and they're being kept there by the Federal Reserve. And specifically, there's a new report out this morning that says that Gilbert Garcia is a managing partner over at Garcia Hamilton and Associates, and says that inflation is too high. The central bank needs to move quicker to get it under control by raising interest rates. He says this has been kept artificially low for too long. And if you want to take a look at this chart, this is the episodes of U.S. inflation through history. Look where we were during World War II, 20% inflation post World War II. Okay, then a plummet to about 10% during the Korean War. Then we saw an economic expansion through the 1960s. When we saw the oil shocks of the 1970s and 80s, the early 1980s, when we saw interest rates at about 19%, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, my dad was a realtor at the time, and he talked about like the early 1980s. He worked for Century 21, and he said, you had 19% interest rates at that time. Like, think about trying to get a mortgage with an 18 or 19% mortgage rate. And now where we are here on the far right side of your screen, and interest rates are at like 2%.
Yeah.
2%. I mean, something's out of whack here, and it's the Fed's doing.
I don't know if you got to this point in the book, but she points out that low interest rates were supposed to be temporary. Yeah. They were in response to the mortgage crisis, and then President Trump continued to sort of browbeat the Fed and say we want low interest rates because it made him look good, right? But most things like this in the United States, when we're told, oh, that's going to be temporary, they end up not being temporary. Did you know that income tax was supposed to be temporary?
No, I didn't.
When it was written into the Constitution in the 1800s, it was supposed to expire. And then Congress wrote in a bill to make it permanent. So we no longer consider it temporary. But it was supposed to be a temporary fix to that kind of thing. Income tax now is a thing. Well, that's a certainty.
That's what Elon Musk talked about the other day, right, at that summit with the Wall Street Journal. He said, anytime you have regulations in a country, unless they've written in with a sunset provision, he said almost every one of them is going to be here forever. Like, they never are sunsetted. They are always here. They never go away. And that is true of these interest rates within the United States, that we saw 2 different rate slashes over the past few days or past few months during the pandemic. The Fed, after being browbeat by President Trump, put in an emergency rate cut to drop it down a little bit. Then a few months later, they did it again. And they just stayed there. These rate cuts have just stayed there artificially low. So that, you can get a mortgage, at 2.95%, which is unbelievable when you look at this chart. It's unbelievable. And you see, we saw the gas price spikes of a number of years ago, and now these supply chain disruptions and artificially low interest rates kept at this level. Just really, really stunning. Really, really stunning. Oh, boy. Well, we've got...
So isn't that like... that's basically what's going on in Turkey as well, where Erdogan is like artificially keeping the interest rate really, really low while their inflation is just like spiraling out of control.
Right.
And he's got that whole mentality of like, no, this is fine. Everything's fine. And
everything's fine. Nothing to see here.
It's like he's taking a page right out of our book. I wonder if that comes with our Learn Democracy plan. We have
it's our Learn Democracy 101. Yeah, 20% inflation rate in Turkey. 20%.
Yeah. And it's getting worse too.
Getting worse, and you have run on the banks. So you have a currency now. That's why I try to talk about here on the show all the time. If you have your money tied to the U.S. currency, I can't help you. I just can't help you. You've got to move your money. Be smart about it. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a CPA, so do your own thing. But if you have your own money tied to the U.S. dollar, I just can't help you. It just makes no sense to me. Yes, you need a little bit of liquid cash, obviously, for transactions and things like that. But that should not be the bulk of your savings or your financial future. When you look at things that are a hedge against inflation, like real estate, gold, silver, that's why there's such a demand for these items right now in precious metals, because of the runaway government spending. On top of that, cryptocurrency, outside of this centralized banking system. Carol Roth makes the point in this book, the death of small business, or the war on small business. I encourage you all to read it. I mean, it just came out. I'm on like chapter 3, but it is a page turner. So you really understand like how the government just screwed small businesses and poured just billions of dollars into Wall Street to make sure that Wall Street was taken care of while these small businesses got screwed. And you realize that the printing of this money, it just continues us on a downward spiral. In the United States, I don't believe is going to be able to bounce back from this. I don't see how it can. You can't print your way out of this mess.